Hey guys, David here and welcome to another video. As promised in my review of the Laser Master 2 Pro, I will be building an enclosure for it as, in my opinion, this is one of the best lasers out there and I definitely want to continue using this a lot. And with this kind of laser engraver, you just need an enclosure. There's no debate about it. And since I've gotten a lot of requests on my previous enclosure for my original Laser Master, which you can see over here where I have retrofitted an endurance laser onto it, when I built this, a lot of people were asking either if I was selling these enclosures or about detailed plans. And while I would love to sell these enclosures, shipping them would be prohibitively expensive, so that's sadly not an option. But I will do the next best thing in this video, and that is to show you step by step exactly how you can build your own enclosure. So for this second iteration, I have simplified the design a bit so that it is easier for you to build, and especially it does not require a lot of tools at all. The only tools you really need is some sort of drill. Just the handheld drill is perfectly fine, and you will need some sort of a saw. You can get away with a handsaw. A jigsaw would be even better, but not technically required. Apart from that, maybe some sandpaper, a file, but that's about it. That's all the tools that you need to build the enclosure. Now, I'm assuming this will be a fairly long video, so I will have timestamps throughout this video and chapters, so you can either use the little feature on the side or go look at them in the description, and that should make it easier for you to jump back and forth to the parts that you maybe missed or want to look at again or something like that. And this here is where I would usually put a sponsor spot, but in this video I instead want to just remind you guys about affiliate links. I know you may be tired of them, but if you don't know what they are a great way to support your favorite YouTubers. By using the link, mine are all linked down in the description under every video. If you use these links, then the site knows that you were sent by that person and will give a small percentage of the price that you pay on there to that person. To you, that comes at no extra cost, that's just cost of doing business for them. But for a content creator, this helps out immensely. Even if you just buy a single item with my links down below, it will help me more than watching every single ad on every single video that I've ever released. That's how much this really helps. And for this video, as for most of the videos, I will of course have all the relevant things mentioned in this video, like the laser itself and some of the components down below in the description as affiliate links. So if you use these links, then I will get a small kickback as well. So now back to the video. Instead of just giving you all the dimensions that I'm using to build this exact enclosure, I instead want to give you the tools that you need to figure out yourself how large you want your enclosure. The reason for that is that you might not have a Laser Master 2 Pro, but you might have an Atom Stack A5 Pro, or you might have an original Laser Master, or a Sculpt Fun S6. And all of these need a slightly differently sized enclosure. So what you basically want to find out is the maximum size in each way that you need. And to do that, you just cannot figure out what is the furthest part out. On this machine here, it will be this motor here, and this little screw on the other side to tension the belt. So, and then you can just take a measuring stick, measure what that distance is. For me here it's about 62 centimeters, and then you want to add a little bit of room on either side. That's for things like cables, or if you don't build it exactly, or just so it clears and doesn't get snagged on it. How much room you add is kind of up to you, but I'd recommend at least like a centimeter or like half an inch on either side. And then you do the same thing for the depth of your machine, and here you actually want to consider how you're doing the interface for the electronics. On a lot of laser engravers you'll have the electronics kind of protruding to the front. So you can either build the enclosure over top of them, but then you cannot access them anymore directly. On my old enclosure I actually removed the electronics and put them up to the top of the enclosure, but that's fairly involved, and I'm definitely not going to do this for this more simple build. Here on the Laser Master, I actually figured out that I can have my enclosure just barely behind these electronics. And that will still allow me to plug everything in here, use the power button, I can use the E-stop still, and everything works perfectly fine. And with this machine all the way to the front, it is actually blocked a bit further to the back, so this will not interfere with my machine. Now on some other machines that might be different, so you just gotta kind of figure it out how it is for your machine. So I'm taking my measurement from here to the front to the back. And here you need to be careful that if you move your laser all the way back, the drag chain will actually go a bit further. And after you have these two dimensions, last thing you need is the height. And there you just want to be careful that you have the laser adjusted all the way up as far as it will go, as you of course want to cover all your bases. And then you just kind of take the height. For me that's like 17.5 centimeters, and then you add a little bit to the top as well, and that will be your total height. Now, when thinking of the material to buy, on what dimensions to give to the hardware store, for the base, if you're doing a base, and for the top, you need to add the thickness of the material, of course, as well. For this build, I will be using 3mm MDF, which is about 1/8 of an inch. So to the width that I measured plus my spare width, I am adding twice the thickness so that either side will be covered. And then the last thing you need to consider is that the side pieces and the back pieces also need to join together. So on one of them you need to add the thickness as well, as it should probably overlap and not just come at the corner like that to each other, but you want them to butt up nicely. And if you've considered all of these things, it's not that much to consider if you write it down nicely. You can have your enclosure sized for whatever size you need. And then you can just take those dimensions and go to your local hardware store, and they will gladly cut down the material for you. So you don't need to worry about getting straight cuts with a cheap saw or anything like that. And now the next main thing, of course, is that just a black box around it, while it protects you from the laser, it really is not ideal since you want to be able to see inside. And here is where some tinted acrylic comes in. And I get just about 2 comments a week on my original video asking me where I got this sheet. And I was actually lucky that my one of my local hardware stores, only one of them, sells these tinted acrylic sheets in a bunch of different colors. They sell them in this size and half this size. But for a laser, this, which is 50 by 50 centimeters, is just about perfect. Now, if your hardware store does not sell those, you can check Amazon. If I find any, I will leave a link down below. Or otherwise, if you Google, I'm sure you'll find like a plastics supplier somewhere in your area that you can order it from. Might be a bit more expensive doing it this route, but it really is worth it. And it's not actually any like special laser protective stuff. You can get that, of course, as well, but that's a lot more expensive. It is just some orange tinted acrylic. Red tinted would also work, but those tend to be a bit darker, so it's a bit harder to see inside. And the way that those work is that they just kind of, the laser light itself is blue, and that's kind of at the opposite end of the light spectrum, which is visible to us. So any like red and orange light will easily get through, and that's how you are able to see your part, whereas all the blue light actually gets absorbed. That's why it gets its orange color. And in practice, that is very noticeable. Without this sheet, it's super bright and blue, but once you put it on, there's only a very faint light visible where the laser is. And you can even see this on many models that have a little orange piece already integrated. Then the next step is that you have to do some sort of cutting. The main thing that you have to do is make the cutout in the top so you can add your acrylic. Now, if you're lucky and you can find a sheet that is actually large enough to cover the entire top, then you can maybe even skip this step. But for me, it was not quite large enough, so I'm using my top here, and I just kind of placed this acrylic sheet on top, centered it to where I want it, then traced around it, and then used these lines to make an offset line slightly inside. You could also measure and calculate it, but sometimes just doing it the easy way is a lot more convenient than doing the math. To make this cutout, the easiest thing is to drill some holes in the corners, and then you can either use a jigsaw or you can use just a handsaw. And I found out that actually the handsaw worked just about as fast and gave me a cleaner cut. So for this, sometimes it might even be easier with a handsaw, but a jigsaw will also work perfectly. And then afterwards I just kind of clean up the edge a bit with a file and some sandpaper just to make it look nice. You can be as precise or as imprecise with this as you want, as it doesn't really matter just how large exactly this cutout is. It just basically needs to enable you to get your hands inside to get in and out your workpiece. Then the other thing you need to do is make a cutout for the exhaust fan. The best enclosure is not going to do you anything if it just keeps the smoke inside. It's just going to fill up with smoke, it's going to block the laser path, and in the end you open it to get your path out and you get still all the smoke. So what I'm using is just a cheap exhaust fan off of AliExpress. It's about $10. You can probably also get it off of Amazon. Many people online have also like kind of 3D printed stuff for PC fans and gone through a bunch of trouble, but this thing is super cheap and it works a lot better since it's actually meant for that. And to go with that, you can also get this flexible ducting that is also super cheap that clamps directly onto it without any special things, and you can get as long of a piece of that as you need to get it out of the next window. And then the smoke is captured and through that and the hose put out of the window, and you don't need to worry about it anymore. You'll have a clean indoors. To make that cutout, you can either use a jigsaw or you can use a scroll saw if you don't have a jigsaw, or if you don't have a scroll saw either, you can drill a bunch of holes all around and then use a file to connect them, and that will work as well. You don't even need to be all that precise with it, as there will be a cover over it anyhow that covers it up. Now, due to the way that I decided to do the front of my machine, I also had to create this additional piece that will go on the bottom, as otherwise there will be a giant air gap here. But if you don't do it this way, but instead have the thing go all the way down, you don't need this piece. This just simply goes here and makes sure that there is no smoke escaping down here. One quick note for the Laser Master 2 Pro, which has the flame sensor here. Doing it this way, of course, blocks it. You could make a cutout for it, but I have not really figured out how that is supposed to work anyhow. When I put a lighter in front of it, it did not detect it, so I'm not too worried about that. This piece I will actually attach to the laser itself instead of the enclosure, as this will allow me to just put the enclosure over top of it and remove it this way while this piece stays attached to the laser. Finally, you need some way of easily attaching these pieces to each other. If you're using 3mm or 1/8 inch MDF like this, it is not enough to just kind of butt it up against each other and put some glue there. It will not hold properly. So I made up some of these strips here on the table saw just because I had it set up already. But instead you can also just get some square wooden pegs at the hardware store, like 10mm or like 1/2 inch would be perfect for this. Or if you're using thicker material, like maybe 6 or 8mm MDF, which would be like a 1/4 inch or above, then you can probably also get away without these. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and glue this thing up. I'm gonna use glue on these pieces and the MDF, glue it there, and just use some nails to temporarily hold it in place while the glue is drying. You can also clamp it or use tape or something, but using nails is the easiest way. And they won't add that much strength after the glue is dried, but they're great to keep it in place. Alrighty, so here we are. The main part of the enclosure is done. It's all dried up and holds together. And I'm actually surprised how sturdy this 3mm MDF is. Together with the bracing in the corners, this is plenty strong enough for a laser enclosure. As long as you're not planning on like putting a bunch of stuff on top of it. But even then, you'll probably be fine. Now, at this point, if you just want a bare minimum enclosure, you're almost done already. It would be here a good point to paint your enclosure if you're planning on doing that, since there's nothing added to it yet. Since my MDF already has this gray coating on the outside, I think I'm going to skip painting it for now. Might add a coat of paint later. But the next steps will be to add your acrylic on top of it. And to do that, you're of course going to need some hinges. Now, I actually forgot to buy hinges when I was at the hardware store, so and I just have one left over from a different project, so I'll do that at a later point. But I'll still go ahead and show you. You just want some general purpose hinges, nothing too small, like a piano hinge might be a bit small, it's just going to be a pain to mount it, but could also work. But you should have no troubles finding some sort of hinge, otherwise Amazon probably also carries them. Since we're just adding the acrylic to the top, you will have to put something underneath the hinge so it sits flat. And since my acrylic is the same thickness as the material, I'm just using a little piece that I cut off of a scrap that I'm gonna use as a spacer to put down the hinge, and then I can screw through it. Now, this super thin MDF is not going to be great for wood screws. So I will actually drill through holes and use some nuts and bolts to hold this in, as that will be a lot stronger than trying to put a wood screw in this. If you open and close it a lot of times, there's a good chance that you will rip out those screws. To mount it to the acrylic, you can either drill holes through and use nuts and bolts as well. In that case, you will need to make sure that there's a cutout in the top as well, so that the bolts clear on the bottom. Or otherwise, what I did on my other enclosure is I just used some epoxy to glue it down, and this has held up great. You might want to use some sandpaper to scratch up the surface a bit where you're gluing, but other than that, it's been great. So I'm going to assume that you have added your hinges now. I'm going to put this aside again so you can see stuff a bit better. At this point, it's also a good time to add in your exhaust fan. So far, we've only cut out the main hole, but you still need to add some screw-in locations for the corner bolts. For that, you can just mount it in, and then this way you can easily mark out those holes, drill through, and also use some nuts and bolts to secure it in place. And then to the back you can simply attach your hose, and it should include like a hose clamp, so you can put it over top, use a screwdriver to tighten it, and then you're good on that front. I won't go into details on the wiring in the back, as that will be different on whatever exhaust you get, but you should be able to find one that already has a cable attached to it with a plug. That way you don't have to do any wiring yourself. And with that as it is, this enclosure could be completely done. But what I'm actually going to do for mine is I'm also going to add a base to it. And this is completely optional. You don't need to add a base. But the reason I am adding a base to it is so that I can screw in my laser to the base. And if I accidentally bump it or something, it's not going to move in relation to any workpieces I might have. I also want to put in like some strips of wood, maybe if I want to have some locating features to accurately and repeatably engrave many different pieces that are the same. So I can just kind of add a little L bracket or something, set that as my origin point of the laser, and put my pieces there and engrave in the exact position I want every single time. But you can totally skip this and just kind of tape your workpieces down to the table or whatever, and you will be perfectly fine. To mount the top to the bottom, I added some of these little wood strips that I used earlier. I glued them down to the base, and then I'm going to just use a single wood screw in each of one of them. That way I can easily remove the top again if I need to access the laser, as just through this hole is a bit inconvenient if you need to, I don't know, tighten some bolts or something like that. Alright, so as you can see behind me, the enclosure is now complete. Everything is added to it, and I think it turned out quite well. Now there are of course a lot of fancy things that you could add to make the enclosure even better, like for example lighting inside would be great, and I might add that in the future just for filming purposes, but for now this is complete. And here you can also see how the front now came to be with all the electronics on the outside, which is gonna mean that if something happens I can still easily hit the E-stop button here and release it again. So I guess with that, the only thing that is left to do is to do some tests and show you what this enclosure can do with the fan turned off, and how the smoke builds up, and then how this exhaust fan can take all that smoke that has been captured by the enclosure and put it outside. Behind this machine is a window. I have the curtains closed now because with the sun shining outside, you would not be able to see anything with all the glare, so I have blocked it off. But behind here I have the exhaust routed outside of an open window. That's why it's looking a bit weird. Alright, so I just cut out this piece out of some 3mm plywood, and I don't know if it comes across in camera, but it's quite smoky in here. I have not turned on the exhaust. So what I'm gonna do is now turn on the exhaust and then start another one, and you should see it clear up if that shows up on camera. But overall, what I can say, what you definitely cannot see on camera, is even without the exhaust on, from this short cut here, I cannot smell anything in the room. It also, you were able to hear some vibrations through the table, but even the sound of the cutting was quite a bit muffled, and like the fan is barely even audible anymore, not right now. So you might hear a bit of fan noise now. That is the exhaust fan, and within a couple of seconds already, the view inside has gotten a lot more clear, so the smoke is getting exhausted out, which is good. And even now, even just after waiting a short few seconds after turning on the exhaust fan, opening up this window, there was barely any smoke that came out, and there is basically no smell inside of the room. Just to proof, here is the part that I cut out, so I definitely did cut it out of the piece. So I'm going to go ahead and start another cut to test it a bit more. Now I doubt that this shows up on camera, but in person you can actually see how the smoke kind of gets pushed down by the fan and disperses all around, but then is sucked in by the exhaust fan and kind of channels out that way, which is actually kind of cool to see. So this means that this fan definitely is working, and although there is no dedicated inlet for the air, there's enough cracks all around that the air finds a way in to then be exhausted out. Now I hope this helped you to hopefully get your own enclosure built and make your laser a bit more usable. These cheap hobby laser engravers have great potential. You can do a lot with them, but without an enclosure they are really not usable indoors and are kind of a health hazard actually. But I think even if you don't have much building experience at all, you should be able to build an enclosure like this in a Saturday, or if you want to make it fancy, maybe 2 Saturdays, but it's not a big deal. And cost-wise it also is fairly cheap. All the wood itself was maybe like $5 already cut to size. I guess the acrylic is one of the most expensive parts. It's like $18 here. And the exhaust system together is maybe another 15. So all in all, we are well under $50 for an enclosure that is quite capable. So if you liked it, make sure to leave a like down below so I know you enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions, leave a comment. If you made it this far in the video, you might be interested in some merch. I have these cups here, I have shirts, and I also have 2 other designs. They're available in men's sizes and women's sizes in a bunch of different colors. And if shirts, mugs are not your thing, I also have a Cryo PC poster, all of which you can check out down below. So with that, thanks for watching and until next time.